If you're with us for the first time, I encourage you to get a copy of the story. You can download it as well. If you've missed the past weeks, go to the podcast, catch up with us. We've talked about Abraham. Last week we talked about Joseph. We had a lot of fun last week because we had a mannequin on the stage, 3 mannequins in 3 different coats. Coat of human affection, the coat of human achievement, and the coat of divine destiny. In our life, somewhere along the way, we'll lose that coat of affection. We'll lose a coat of achievement, but one coat that nobody can ever take from you is a coat of divine destiny. And if you missed that week's message, go back and pick it up. We also talked about the parallel between Joseph and Jesus. It was a clear picture of what Jesus was like. Today, we're going to be talking about Exodus. Exodus, a story of deliverance. Can somebody guess who we might be talking about if we talk about Exodus? Moses, exactly. And what a character he is. An amazing leader. And he's worth studying. If you want to study leadership, study Moses. We could extract a lot of different lessons out of this message because there's so many different ways to go. There's a lot of truths embedded in it. And we cover quite a period of time again. But today we'll look at an upper story and a lower story. The upper story is what happened when they came out of Egypt. There was something instituted called Passover, where a lamb was sacrificed, and that story of Passover parallels, amazingly, that Christ is our Passover lamb. We'll get to that. So that's part of that upper story where God again is projecting for us on a mountain of prophecy. He's looking into the distance and he's again sharing that there is a Savior coming. God chose a man, Abraham. He chose a people, the Israelites, and from them would come the Savior, the Redeemer for mankind. And again, this story, when you fly at 30,000 feet, the upper story, you can see that he's pointing towards this Messiah that would come. On the lower story, we're going to be talking about Moses, how he leads the children of Israel out of Egypt into a promised land. And that story has some type and shadow, some familiarities. There's things that are very similar there. Egypt is kind of like a kingdom of darkness. We were once in the kingdom of darkness. Colossians 1:13 says he translated us from the kingdom of darkness and he brought us into a kingdom of light. Similarly, Moses took the children of Israel out of slavery. We were once slaves to sin. He took them out of slavery and brought them into freedom. Christ brought us into freedom. So there's similarities there. So we're going to look at Moses, how he does that. And through this story, he encounters, of course, Pharaoh. And we're going to learn that Moses chose not to compromise. He was fully in, all in, fully devoted to follow what God asked him to do. So let's back up a bit and start with his birth, time when he was born. Last week talking about Joseph. There's about 400 years that has passed. Abram had heard the message from God that the children of Israel would be taken captive for about 400 years, and that's what's happened. Joseph is now long gone in the rearview mirror. They've forgotten about him. Pharaoh presently doesn't remember him. And he's getting concerned because the children of Israel, they're growing, they're multiplying. And he gets his leaders together, and Pharaoh says, if we don't watch it, there's so many of them that they could join an enemy army and they would leave us. He was concerned about it back then. We could lose these people. Right now they're doing a lot of work for us. We need these people. So what he decides to do is he calls in the Hebrew midwives that help the women deliver. He said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to kill the baby boys. Well, the Hebrew midwives, they don't do that, of course. And so he says, I've got to come up with another plan. So he enforces this, that all the Hebrew boys that are born from then on would get thrown into the Nile River. Moses' parents are great people of faith. His mom, a great woman of faith, and she says, I'm not going to do that. This boy, there's something about this boy. And she builds a basket. Maybe you've seen the movie, The Prince of Egypt, 10 Commandments. There's a lot of movies about this. Maybe you've seen one of the movies. And she builds this basket, and she puts Moses into this basket. It's got tar, pitch on it to keep it waterproof, and Moses would float down the Nile. And this is really the beginning of the story of Exodus, because God would raise up a leader, Moses, to bring them out of that land. There's a movie that recently came out called Exodus, Gods and Kings. That was in the theaters. Maybe it's still in the theaters, not sure. And there was a buzz about that. That got people reading the story of Exodus. And there's another one that's released, a documentary coming out. I'm not sure if it's in the theaters in Canada, but it was in the U.S. And that's called Pattern of Evidence, Exodus. Because it's really quite the story as we get into it. Plagues, Red Sea parting, and there's a lot of drama in this story. And this last one, Pattern of Evidence, is come out to give proof that the Exodus really took place. There's been some controversy. Did it actually take place? Did this nation really leave? And so this gives evidence to it. When I was in Egypt studying, we went to the Egyptian Museum there in Cairo, and what a museum that is. If you have a chance, I encourage you to go there. And some of the people that were with us there had taught there in their seminaries, they're theologians, but also academics. And one of them took me and said, I want to show you the place where it's written here. I'll show you where the proof that they were in Israel. Israel was in Egypt and how they left. And so it was great for me to be there, but I'm looking forward to seeing this documentary that would lead to that and give evidence of going from Egypt out into the promised land. There was this young boy, and his mom had sent him to Sunday school. She didn't go to church, but she sent her son to church. She thought it'd be a good idea. And he came home one day and asked, and his mom asked, said, so what did you learn in Sunday school today, Joey? And he goes, wow, today we learned about Moses taking the people of Israel out of Egypt. And she goes, oh, really? Well, what did the teacher tell you? What's it about? He says, well, it's an amazing story. It's quite something, because Moses is kind of like a Navy SEAL, and God sent him on a secret mission. He had to go into Egypt, and he had to rescue the people, he had to get them out of the country. She goes, okay, well, how did he do that? Well, it's quite complicated, but he leads them up to the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army was coming up behind them, and they were approaching them. They had nowhere to go. The sea was in front of them, so he got on the radio, and he called in the bombers, and the bombers came, and they bombed the Egyptian army behind them. There was all this fire. The fire was so big, it kept them from attacking them. And then Moses called his engineers. The engineers got there, and they built a pontoon bridge right across the Red Sea, and everybody got on the pontoon bridge and they walked across, no problem. And then as they got there, they saw the army now coming, so he called the bombers again. The bombers came, they bombed the bridge, and the army got wiped out, and everybody got across safe. And she's, now Joey, is that really what your Sunday school teacher taught you? He goes, well, no, Mom, but if I told it the way she did, you'd never believe me. Because it is quite a story. It takes some faith to believe it. I do believe that science backs it up, but that's another topic. It starts with Moses on the Nile River, drifting down. His sister walking along the bulrushes, watching him. Pharaoh's daughter goes down to take a bath in the river, and she spots the baby. She hears the baby. She pulls it out, and she goes, oh, this is one of the Hebrew children. And has compassion and decides to keep the boy. Older sister puts up her hand and says, hey, do you need a nurse? And she goes, well, I do need a nurse. She says, I know a Hebrew woman that could help. Her mom. She goes and gets Moses' mom. Moses' mom is paid out of the royal treasury to nurse Moses. Moses grows up, and she gives the baby, now grown up, Moses, to be raised in Pharaoh's home. He has the best training, the best education. He has a life of royalty there in Pharaoh's home. Lives there for 40 years. He's trained, again, with the best. He knows his background. And one day he sees a Hebrew slave being beaten by this Egyptian. He takes matters in his own hands, and he kills the Egyptian. Pharaoh finds out about it, and he has to run for his life. So he leaves, and he flees into the desert. There he'd meet some ranchers, taking care of sheep and goats, and he'd end up marrying one of those ladies and starts his family. 40 years as a prince of Egypt, 40 years now in the desert. 80 years of age, and God would speak to him. He's on a mountain, a bush starts to burn. He goes, that's unusual. Bush is burning for no reason, and he watches it for a while. So he goes over to check it out, and out of the bush, God speaks to him and says, I'm calling you to go deliver the people. And Moses is like, God, I think you got the wrong person. Earlier on, he might have done it, but now 40 years of seizing and maturing, and he just doesn't feel like he's the right person. He said, I got a little bit of history in Egypt. I didn't leave on the best terms. I really don't think Pharaoh wants to see me anyhow, so I'm probably not the best person to go say, let all these people go. Now, we're not talking about, 50 people or 100 people. We're talking about, the scriptures say 600,000 men, plus women, plus children. So it could be, let's say, 3 million people. That's a big deal. He says, secondly, I'm not very good at public speaking. That's probably still one of the biggest fears people have is public speaking. He says that I'm not very good speaking in front of a leader like that. So I respectfully decline your offer, God. God doesn't put up with our excuses. He didn't put up with Moses' excuses, and he probably won't put up with your excuses when he asks you to do something. God will say, wait a minute, I'm going to be with you. Your speech problem, you have an older brother Aaron, and he's going to meet up with you, and you and Aaron are going to go, and you're going to present this to Pharaoh, that the people need to go. So that's kind of the background. Moses would go, and he'd approach Pharaoh, and God would reveal himself to them. God's at work. There was no atheist in the land of Egypt. Everybody believed in a God. Or gods. They had a lot of gods. You can just Google Egyptian gods and you'll get a whole bunch of them. If you go to that Egyptian museum in Cairo, you can see a lot of them there. There's a lot of them. They were entrenched in that. God would reveal to the people of Israel, the Hebrews, but also the Egyptians, that He alone is God. There are 10 plagues. Each one of the plagues is really a mockery against their God. You want to worship that God? See if your God can do something about this. God's speaking. He's speaking loud and He's speaking strong. I am God. This lesson they would need to learn. Later on, Moses would give them the 10 commandments through God. One of those commandments here on the wall, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And God would reveal Himself. I am the one you're looking for. I am the true God. And some of the Egyptians actually left with the Israelites to go into the promised land. They turned out to believe. Many of them didn't. But God would reveal Himself. Moses and his brother, they go to Pharaoh. And he takes his staff and puts it down. It turns into a snake. He shows that God's power is with them. The Egyptian magicians, they kind of do the same thing. And Pharaoh's really not convinced. And so now start the plagues. The first 4 plagues are there in your notes. The first plague was Nile River, water turned to blood. This mocked one of the gods of Egyptians. It was the god of the Nile. The second plague was a plague of frogs. Now, the frogs to them were sacred. Much like going to India, cows are sacred in that land. To them, the frogs were sacred. You didn't kill frogs. They had a god, a frog god, and so it was a mockery against that god. There was a plague of lice, and there was a mockery of their earth god, because Moses had taken the dust of the earth and thrown in, and it became lice. And it was, again, where is your God? If your God is a God of earth, why doesn't He stop this? And so it was, again, a strong message that He is God over the earth. Then there was the flies, which was a mockery of their beetle god. So these first 4 plagues took place. And Moses would go back to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And when he goes to Moses and says, let my people go, Pharaoh does something. He tries to negotiate with Moses. He tries to offer him a deal. And likewise, when we get sold out for God, the enemy will try to come along and say, hey, wait a minute, let me offer you a deal. And so we want to find out what the first deal is that Pharaoh offered Moses. So I'm going to get Jenny to help me, and this is deal or no deal from Pharaoh. All right, can we have the music? Jenny's going to help us on this morning. There it is, deal or no deal. Pharaoh is addressing Moses. The plagues have happened. He's going to cut a deal with Moses. And so, Jenny, could you show us deal number 1 that Pharaoh is offering Moses? There it is, deal number 1. Can you show the audience, please? We need their help this morning. Go, but worship in my kingdom. Audience, can you help? A poll in the audience. Should Moses accept the deal? No, absolutely right. Thank you, Jenny. No deal on that one. Very good. You had the right answer, audience. Thank you. No, Moses does not accept that deal. You can read it there in Exodus 8:25. Pharaoh called in Moses and Aaron and said, "Go ahead, sacrifice to your God, but do it here in this country." Likewise, our enemy will say to us, "Oh, you want to be a Christian. You want to worship God. Okay, you can worship God, but do it in my kingdom. Don't go to church. You don't have to go to church to worship. Don't go to life group. You don't have to go to life group. You can worship God on your own. You don't need to be with others. You don't need to leave your friends. You don't need to you can still go to your nightclub. You can still live the way you want to. You can still speak the way you want to. You can have all the ways of the world, but yet you can still worship your God." And this is what he offers us. The Bible says here in Corinthians, "Come out and be separate." In the Message Bible it says, "So leave the corruption and compromise. Leave it for good," says God. "Don't link up with those who will pollute you." In Psalms chapter 1, it's a great psalm. It starts off with, "Don't walk in the counsel of the ungodly. Don't stand in the way of sinners. Don't sit in the seat of scornfuls. Walk, stand, and sit." There's a progression there. And it's not an easy thing for us as believers, because we're in the world, but we're not of the world. And God's asked us to be fully devoted to Him. But there's this constant pressure to compromise on our belief, to compromise and to give into it and to be a part of it. And what if I get rejected? And I want to be accepted. And we have to contextualize it. We have to live it out every week. We have to live this out. And it'll be different for you than it is for me and for the next person. But there's this choice we have to make and say, "No, I can't do that. I'm not going to compromise. I will be a true worshiper of Jesus in every situation." When I worked in the oil industry, the guys that I worked with, we'd sometimes visit different refineries, go to different cities and so forth, or mines. And one of the things that they liked to do afterwards was go to a comedy club, and sometimes they'd want to go to a strip joint and so forth. And they'd say, "Come on, Koop, let's go." And they knew I was a Christian. They said, "Come on, you can do this. Come on, let's go." And I'd say, "No, I can't do it." And I'd be in my room by myself. And I said, "No, I'm not going to do it." Just to make a choice. No, come out and be separate. I'm not going to be a worshiper and then live half in and half out. You know what Jesus said in Revelation chapter 3, verse 15? He says, "Make up your mind. Are you going to be hot or cold? Don't be lukewarm." And I think God's looking for people that passionately follow Him. That, no, I'm going to be sold out for God. I'm not going to live this lukewarm life. I'm not going to be, Sunday I go to church, but during the rest of the week I'm somebody else. He's looking for people. No, not going to take that deal. No deal. I am going to fully worship God. Well, I don't know if I want to be in that kind of church. I'd rather go to church where on Sunday I can do my Christian thing, but during the rest of the week I can look like everybody else. And, well, maybe this isn't your church then. God's looking for people that are devoted, fully devoted. Jesus said in Revelation, "Make up your mind. Be hot or cold, lukewarm. You make me vomit. It makes me puke." Get passionate. You can't serve the world and serve God at the same time. When you decide to follow God, and it's not God's like, "Oh, I don't want you to have any fun because the world's fun and I'm not." No, that's not it. God is the most fun. God is joy. It's the best life. And most of us, if we're really honest, is when we lived in the world, we had the most misery there. Oh, sin has its fun for a season, but we know it's like a deadly trap that slowly brings you in. And God says, "I don't want you killed. I don't want you destroyed. I don't want you sucked into that. I have a higher life for you, a better life for you. The enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. But I've come that you might have life, and life more abundantly." So I'm asking you to leave the world system behind. That doesn't mean we don't interact with the world. We do business. We live with people. We're out there. We're amongst them. It doesn't mean we have to operate in their ways, their culture, their language, their systems, and be caught up in that. Temporal life. We have a higher life that we can live. So that was deal number 1. Deal number 2. Moses doesn't take it, so Pharaoh comes right back. He says, I've got another deal for you. So we need to get Jenny back up here and find out what deal number 2 is. All right, here we go. Give Jenny a big welcome. Come on up here. Deal or no deal. She's presenting the deal that Pharaoh had for Moses that day. Will you open the briefcase, please? A lot of suspense. What is deal number 2? Deal number 2 is go, but stay close to my kingdom. All right, show the audience, because we got to poll the audience here. Everybody see the deal? Go, but stay close to my kingdom. Audience, we need your help. Should Moses accept the deal? No. Thank you. Right answer. Okay, very good. Thank you, Jenny. Go, but stay close to my kingdom. This is what he says. Exodus 8:28. Pharaoh said, all right, I'll release you to go sacrifice to your God in the wilderness. Only don't go too far. Now pray for me. This is kind of like the enemy come along and saying, all right, you want to be a Christian? You want to worship God? Okay, you can go and do it. But just don't get too extreme. Just don't get too radical. Matter of fact, it's okay to be a believer and see how close to the edge you can get. Well, I didn't quite do it. I didn't quite look, or I didn't quite take it. I didn't quite do it. But I saw how close to the edge I could get without falling in. No, the Bible says to flee youthful lusts, to flee temptation. Submit yourself to God, resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. And so we don't want to live our life saying, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm going to see how close I can get to compromising and still be a believer. This is what he's offering to him. Okay, you can go worship, but I want you to stay real close to my kingdom. If we stay too close, if we live there habitually, eventually that thing will try to grab you and pull you back. Pull you back into darkness. Pull you back into the torment that was in between your ears. Pull you back into the pain that was there when you were a captive, a slave of sin. Your enemy is ruthless. As Jesus said, Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but I've come to give you life, and life more abundantly. Remember last week's message? Joseph was tempted by Potiphar's wife. He didn't see how close he could get to the edge. He ran from her. It looked like it didn't work out because he got thrown in prison. But God would take him from there to be the prime minister. I think there's more than one person that God wants to promote. He wants them to take them to a next level. And they need to first run from a temptation. Maybe today there's an area in your life, and this message is speaking right to you. And God's just waiting to promote you. He's going to say, I'm going to run from that. I'm not going to flirt with it anymore. Look at this verse here out of James chapter 4. You're cheating on God. The cheating on God here is, in the other translations, it says it's like a spiritual adultery. You say you love God, but you're flirting with some other gods. You're cheating on God. If all you want is your own way, flirting with the world every chance you get, you end up enemies of God and His way. So that was deal number 2. After this, Pharaoh again hardened his heart. He says, no way. So there's 3 more plagues that happen. Let me talk a bit about Pharaoh hardening his heart, because I just hear some questions going on. Well, is that really fair? Because it says God hardens his heart. It also says, though, on 4 occasions at least, Pharaoh hardened his heart. God would use his stubbornness, his pride, and it wasn't like he wasn't offered a choice, but he got harder and harder as God revealed his power. And people can be like that. If pride and stubbornness gets a hold of you and the light of God shines on it, it just seems like they get harder and harder. Maybe you've got friends like that. It's kind of like this. It's hard to put a metaphor to describe a spiritual thing, but it's kind of like this. If you had, imagine a frozen river, frozen with ice. On either side, there's a clay bank. Spring comes. The sun shines, the water melts, but the clay becomes hard. It's the same sun, but they react differently. The same light was shining. Some hearts were getting soft and some hearts were getting hardened. Pharaoh's heart gets harder and harder in the process. So the next 3 plagues come. There's a disease on the animals. This was a mockery of their sacred bull god. One of the things that Moses had said to Pharaoh was, if we offer a sacrifice amongst the Egyptians, it's going to offend them. So we can't do that. We need to go outside. And sometimes a worshiping believer, people don't understand it. Until you've experienced the love of Christ, until you know that He's washed your sins away, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Even some of the songs we sing, unless you understand what they mean, and be like, I don't understand what they're singing about. I don't understand what they're so excited about. I don't understand why their hands are there. It doesn't make sense to us. He's saying they really will not understand our worship. There was boils, which is a mockery of their warrior goddess, a goddess of healing. There was hail and fire, which was a mockery of their goddess of the sky. So again, Pharaoh would come and Moses would come and approach Pharaoh. And guess what? Pharaoh has deal number 3. So give Jenny a big welcome again. We're going to see deal number 3. Deal or no deal, Moses, what will it be? Deal or no deal? The suspension, the tension is mounting. We're wondering, what could Pharaoh be offering Moses in deal number 3? Go, but leave your children. Deal number 3. Moses, you can go, but you have to leave your kids behind. Poll in the audience. Should Moses take the deal? No deal. All right. Pharaoh loses again. Doesn't take deal number 3. Look at the verse there. Exodus 10:10 and 11. He said, I'd sooner send you off with God's blessing than let you go with your children. Look, you're up to no good. It's written all over your faces. Nothing doing. Just the men are going. Go ahead, worship God. That's what you want so badly. And they were thrown out of Pharaoh's presence because they said no deal. Our enemy does similar things. He comes along and says, okay, you want to be Christians. You're going to serve God. But don't bring your children with you. Oh, it's okay if you go to church, but don't bring your kids. It's a lot of work to bring them. It's okay if you read your Bible, but don't force that on your children. They have a right to decide their own religion. There are many ways to God. Who are you to kind of push your belief upon them? They should be able to decide for themselves. The first institute that God created was not the church, it was the family. He said, teach them on the way. Teach them when you walk. He teach them when you go to the school. Teach them when you walk to the park. Instruct them in my ways. And there is a lie that the enemy would like to perpetrate, is that you have no right to teach your children. You have no right to give them spiritual instruction. But that's the exact thing that God asked you to do. That's what He'll hold you accountable for. Did you raise your children in the ways of the Lord? Well, I just think my little Johnny, he should be able to decide that on his own. When he grows up, he can decide whether he wants to live by a moral standard or not, and he can live by his feelings and not by faith, and I think he has the right to do that. Yeah, when little Johnny turns to be about 18, you'll be like, oh my goodness, why did I do that? This is not the way I thought it would be. Pharaoh wants the next generation. There's an enemy that wants the next generation. And I propose to you today that as parents, as church, as a community, we don't just say, que sera, sera, when it comes to our children. No, they will come with us on our journey of faith. Later on, Moses' intern, his apprentice, his name is Joshua, and Joshua would stand up and say to a nation, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes you wonder, is it worth it? Is it making any difference? But it will make a difference. My mom is one of my heroes, and as is my dad. And we had devotions every day. And I'm sure some days they probably didn't want to do devotions. We weren't the most cooperative group when it came to devotions. And we did it before, after breakfast, every morning we did it. One day my brother, he brought a friend home from school, and his friend had siblings in my grade. And this is how silly it was, but I should be transparent today. My thought was, if we do devotions in our house, he'll go back and tell his friends, and they'll think we're a bunch of religious nutcases, and that's going to spread to high school, and I'm going to be rejected because of that. So that was my train of thought. And so I went to my mom, I knocked on her bedroom door, and she was getting ready, and breakfast was made, and I knocked on her door, she was ready to come out, and I said, Mom, I got a little proposal for you this morning. You know that Wes has got some friends over here today, and I just thinking, they probably won't understand us reading the Bible, and they probably won't understand us praying, because I don't think they do that in their house. So maybe today we should just skip devotions. What do you think? And I'll never forget my mom's response. Son, we read the Bible every day. We do devotions every day, and we're not ashamed of it. And yes, I'm going to do it. So that was it. Mom had spoken, and I went and I sat down. And I think she read like 4 passages that day. I think she prayed so long. I think she was just like, we're really going to give it a double dose today. And I don't remember a thing that it was about. I just remember peeking and wondering, what's that guy thinking? And nothing came of it. It was fine. I never was teased about it. But there's an enemy who would like us to compromise on that. It takes work to get your children ready to go to church on a Sunday. It takes work to do a devotion. One of the things we love about doing the story, we've had so many good reports. We might even come up with some creative ways to show you what's going on in the background. But I've heard stories of children running up to their parents, say, "Hey, can we read the story today?" And different age groups, because the story is available in different age levels, and we're seeing families coming together and doing it. I'll tell you what, God is so proud of you when you do that. You're making the enemy nervous because he knows that this truth, the incorruptible truth, will produce fruit for years to come. So that was the third deal. 2 more plagues happened, locusts, and then the plague of darkness, which was a mockery against Pharaoh himself. He was the deity. He was considered to be the son of the sun, or Ra, the sun god. And so that was the 9th plague. And now we would have Moses going again to Pharaoh saying, "Let my people go." And guess what? Pharaoh has a deal for Moses. So we need Jenny again. And the last one, would you give her a big hand one more time? Deal or no deal? The music, please. It's a tense moment. A lot of pressure here. Moses has come before Pharaoh. Everybody's watching. And Pharaoh's going to play his best hand. What is the deal? Jenny, could we see, please? Deal number 4. Deal number 4, Pharaoh says, you can go, but without your flocks. Polling the audience, should Moses accept the deal? No deal. All right. Thank you, Jenny. No deal. And you're right. Don't accept that deal. Look what he says, Exodus 10:24. Pharaoh called in Moses, go and worship God. Leave your flocks, your herds behind, but go ahead and take your children. Wow. At this point, if you're Moses, you could be a little wore out. You could be like, this is getting really tiring. I'm getting tired of the plagues. I'm getting tired of these people. They're not so happy with him. I'm like, when are we going to get out of here? It's been 9 months. I think that's the time period, 9 months. And at that point, you could just be like, you know what? All right, let's just get out of here, cut our losses, and leave. You could understand it. But you got to like Moses. This guy has got steel in his backbone. He's a man's man, if you like. And he's a man of faith. And when Pharaoh offers him this deal, you can read it yourself. You know what his response is? We're going. We're all going. The kids are going. I got news for you, Pharaoh. Not one hoof will be left behind. Wow. Just the tenacity, the strength of his faith. He had heard from God. No, we're going. And he would leave them. Our enemy would like us to leave our wealth, our flocks, our businesses in another division. Oh, don't surrender that to God. One thing, you surrender your family and you have your devotions, but don't surrender your company to God. Don't surrender your first to Him. No, you keep that for yourself. Moses said, no, this is our sacrifice, and we're taking it with us. It would be like a farmer going and somebody saying, oh, you can go farm the land, but you don't get to take any seed with you. They said, no, I'm taking my seed with me. Because when we bring our wealth with us under the submission of the Lordship of Christ, that's where our heart is. It was Jesus who said, wherever your heart is, that's where your treasure is going to be. And Moses was saying, no, our flocks, our wealth, they're coming with us in our journey. One of the last things we bring on our journey of faith is often our wallet. It takes, because it's one of the things we wrestle with the most. Because we think, no, this is my money. I made it. I earned it. It's my company. It's my paycheck. Thank you very much. I'll hang on to it. God, I'll worship you, but this is my money. Different account, different thing. God says, no, when you follow me, it all comes under my lordship. I gave you your last breath. I gave you that job. Every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father above, with whom there's no shadow of turning. Everything we have is a gift from Him. And Moses will say, no, this all belongs to our God that we worship. And we will worship Him with what we have. And likewise for the believer, I will worship God with my money. My walk with God doesn't finish on a Sunday and then I go to work on a Monday, my business, and I live a different way. My company belongs to God. My bank account belongs to God. And when I give to God, it is a sweet smelling aroma. It is a sacrifice. That's what Paul said in Philippians 4:18 and 19. Indeed, I have all and abound. I'm filled, having received from Epaphroditus the things sent from you, a sweet smelling aroma, an acceptable sacrifice, well pleasing to God. Here's the verse we quote a lot. Starts with a conjunction because it's connected to the other part. And my God shall supply all your needs according to His riches in glory by Christ Jesus. The last plague comes, the death of the firstborn. It mocked again one of their gods. That night, there's incredible mourning in Egypt. When the firstborn died, the wife or the mother of that Egyptian home would go outside on the streets and mourn out loud. That was their custom. Can you imagine the wailing that would have been going on that night? As the firstborn of every Egyptian household died, right to Pharaoh, even their animals. Now, God said, your people will be spared if you do this. Take a lamb, kill it, take the blood, put it over the doorpost of your house. And when that death angel comes, it will pass over that house. That's where we get the word Passover from. So it will pass over. Now, eat of the lamb, take some unleavened bread as well, have a meal, get ready to go because you're leaving. That was on the 14th day, Passover. 3 days later, exactly, they would cross over the Red Sea. The parallel between that Passover lamb and Jesus, again, is now the upper story, 30,000 feet. Jesus is our Passover lamb. When did He die? On that precise day, the 14th day of the first month of their religious calendar, or the 7th month of their civic calendar. That precise day He died. 3 days later, precisely, He would be raised from the dead. His blood would redeem us. His blood would cleanse us. His blood would take us, pay the price, so we would no longer be slaves. You have to buy a slave out of slavery. Even today, we have a lot of slaves in the world. You buy them out of slavery. You pay off their pimp. You pay off the one who's their cruel taskmaster. Our cruel taskmaster was Satan. And Jesus paid the price for your release with His blood. That's why He took us from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light and gave you a new passport, a new life. The parallel is amazing. It's that upper story that God's speaking to us.